Hey guys, it's me, your cool Uncle Marissa. Today I am hanging out with this froggy. That's right, it is the Whiz Rad Forg. My girlfriend crocheted this for me. And I'm going to talk to you today about another Whiz Rad Forg, Natalie the Nerd. Now, if you don't know her, you might be thinking, Uncle, why are you calling someone a nerd? That's kind of rude. But that is her handle. Natalie makes a lot of cool things, and one of the things that she is world famous for in the modding community is her ARC RGB boards. And these are just little boards you put on the motherboard and it lights up all kinds of colors, and you've got your little rave going on and all your tiny friends are gonna party with you. I've installed those lights on boards for friends' Game Boys before. I myself am not a huge RGB fan, but she recently came out with a tactile button board, which is the same thing. It's got tactile buttons and no lights. So that's up my alley. Today we're gonna install it. Let's get to it. So here we have the tactile ARC board. As you can see, the tactile buttons are stickers, and it's overall a very simple board. This one is without the LEDs. The one with the LEDs looks fairly similar. We're just going to go ahead and disassemble the Game Boy Advance down to the motherboard so that we can access the button contacts. Alright, here we are, and if you have an IPS screen or anything of the sort soldered in, you're going to want to desolder those so that we can have clearer, cleaner access with the board, and some of these points will be desoldered and resoldered through the board. As usual with small points like this, I like to use my No Clean Flux pen just to go over the points where we will be soldering. You can identify which points you'll be soldering on by just laying the flex board on top of your motherboard, and those contacts should all line up. I'm also going to throw up this diagram from Natalie's install guide, as I think it's a lot clearer than me trying to zoom in on every single point. Here I'm going to use my soldering iron just to make sure that the solder is malleable enough, given that's a pretty large glob and that will need to be bridged over onto the ARC board. And those larger globs are usually pretty tough, so you might want to add some extra solder. Just make sure to give it a little check. Now we can go ahead and line up the board. I really like how it lines up so cleanly. You don't have to wrap it around any component, so that's very pleasant. And I'm going to secure the board down with some Kapton tape so that it doesn't move about while we're soldering it on. And from there, there's not really much to it. Just solder down into the points. Make sure that you are filling the points with solder, and that way the contact on the motherboard is going to have a bridge that's connected to the flex board. I would suggest using a pointed tip or a J-tip, which I totally understand is a case of do as I say and not as I do here. These ones right here are a little tricky because they're so bunched together. So take extra caution not to bridge them. Once all the other points are soldered down, we can go ahead and take the wires from the screen and resolder those through the flex board and onto the motherboard. Now we're all set to test and make sure that we've installed everything correctly. So I'm just going to pop the buttons back in as well as the membranes, and I'm going to grab my handy dandy external battery pack to make sure everything powers on, and also so that we can check our buttons. Turning on is a fantastic sign. If yours does not turn on, go ahead and reflow the solder on all of your points. Fingers crossed, that should be the solution. It often is with any sort of quick solder board. If you have a flash cart, you can use the Better Button Tester ROM. I've included a link in the description just to make sure all the buttons are working. Otherwise, any game which accepts all inputs is a great alternative. Everything's good, so I'm going to turn it off, remove my battery case, and put everything back together. So let's reassemble everything, screw everything back in, use Kapton tape to keep the board as secure as your heart desires, and then join me for a little chat. Welcome back. Before we do anything, let's do a little sound test. A and B buttons. And now for the directional buttons. And just for a quick comparison, I'm just going to roll over some buttons from a Game Boy Advance without the Tactile mod. Alright, so let's dive in. So first off, they feel good. There's definitely more travel distance with these tactile buttons. I guess that could be more fatiguing, but I have yet to actually spend time playing a game with this installed. I think that it could be more fun for arcade style games than for something like RPG. Imagine, playing Pokemon Pinball with this would be very satisfying to sort of feel that tactility. And speaking of feel, they're not tactile the way that Game Boy Advance SP buttons are. There is distance before you hit that tactile button. The A and B button especially, it's a bit like a camera shutter. With a camera, you press halfway and you sort of hit some sort of bottom, and that's where you're establishing focus, and then you press all the way to engage the shutter and take the photograph. That's exactly what it feels like. Halfway, you reach sort of an impasse, and then when you press all the way, you're pushing the tactile button and it bottoms out there. If you install it and you don't like it, the good thing is you can just peel off the tactile buttons. I'm not really gonna do any pros in terms of it, because if you like that feeling, you like it. It's great. If you don't, you don't. I can't help you. No one can. You are a lost cause. No, I'm kidding. But it's just personal preference, right? In terms of installation, pros, it is very straightforward. You solder the flex board to the pinouts that you know, the little contacts land on. And also the flex board really sits well. You don't have to move it around or go over any bumps on the motherboard or anything in order to get it to align the way you need to. So I've had some flex boards where I've had to do that. In terms of cons, it's a flex board, and these sort of quick solder flex boards that you solder directly onto a motherboard, they're a mixed bag. There are ones which are very sturdy and very strong, and some of them are thinner and require more confidence and more getting it right the first time. Natalie's boards, I think by virtue of the fact that they are going inside a Game Boy, which doesn't have a lot of wiggle room the way that a lot of home consoles do, are thinner. That means you have to get things right pretty quickly, because if you keep trying over and over again, eventually you're going to wear down the flex board. You need to know what you're doing with the soldering iron. As long as you know that, you're good to go. And just some tips for that is making sure you have enough flux, making sure that your soldering iron is at a good temperature for you. It depends on your iron, it depends on your power supply. And making sure that you are getting solder on the point on the motherboard, and then that is connecting to the contact on the flex board. But overall, it's a good mod, it's a fun one, it doesn't take a lot of time, and it's a nice way to add some oomph to your existing Game Boy Advance. I hope this was helpful, I hope you enjoyed it. What do you think about this mod if you have tried it? And if you haven't, do you think you're going to pick one up? Let me know in the comments, and as always, I am open to any and all ideas. If there's a mod you'd like to see me do, if there's something you'd like me to discuss in more detail, just let me know, because as always, my dear Nerd Fuse, I hope you'll come and visit your cool uncle again. See you in the next one.